This is the third monthly meeting of the SnoKing Beekeepers Association on November 17th. Eli Ochiltree presenting. I did put this first slide on to make sure everybody knows that we are working on that website. We're trying to get things moved over. Facebook is not the best platform for some things. I don't think we can beat the discussion group. Okay, so I'm finally figuring out how to put the YouTube link right on the page, and you click on the little YouTube thing and you go to our YouTube channel, which we have. And some people still don't know we have. And then the Facebook, it takes you to the business page. So I've been working on this, and just keep telling me when something's not working, which is the only way we're going to get it done. We're not getting big turnout at the monthly meetings, and a lot of that has to do with changing the email that I'm using to send. We have to be added to the safe sender, our contacts list, and to really find out what's going wrong when we send out 180 emails and almost nobody shows up. And I don't expect 180 people, I don't, but I do expect more people. And I think it has to do with a brand new thing that happened that was anti-spam and anti-unsolicited emails. So we're going to work with Wix on that. We're paying a subscription to them. This kind of messes up getting a newsletter. I will put the monthly to-do list that I did write out on Facebook, and then I'll get it onto the website as soon as I can. And the new newsletter format, it'll be wonderful because Wix can tell us if somebody ever clicked on it to open it, if they clicked on a link within it, and it has an unsubscribe button, and they can just tell us, stop sending me emails. And the newsletter will have to be shorter linked too. And then every link will have to be something that goes back to the website. I think that'll work okay. I think it'll work well on phones and mobile apps. Then a lot of what I talk about today would be great journeyman service opportunities. I am pushing for journeyman service opportunities, partly because I'm teaching the journeyman class starting again in January. And that's Jane's second time. So I hope, oops, sorry. I hope that she can stay on this time. I think the internet may be bumping her off. Okay, we are still having classes online for the foreseeable future. Ron did dangle out the possibility of doing an oxalic acid demo. And Jessica, we could look at that too for the Sultan hive side. I mean, it's a possibility just to break up the, maybe February monotony. January, February, if we get a batch of that good weather, maybe we could try it and demonstrate how to do oxalic treatments. The next beginner course starts next Monday. There's still time to send you everything digitally. If somebody knows somebody who would like to sign up. January, all 3 levels will start in January again after we have a few weeks break. And that's part of why I'm bringing up the journeyman service hours. Anyone who's earned apprentice can start counting their hours, and the service hours category, I don't want to take time for it for people. I don't think everyone here is really interested, but because WASBA decided to kind of crack down on you can't earn the service until you get your apprentice certificate, I want to make sure everybody signs up for apprentice who's going to be helping at the fair next fall. We'll probably offer apprentice at least once more before the fair, but technically, you're not supposed to count your service. Working on the board, helping out on the board, whatever you're doing, presentations to your gardening club or whatever, you're not supposed to really count it unless you have your apprentice certificate in your hand. So see me if that's something you're kind of know is coming up this year. And you'd be amazed who wants you to do presentations. Here I did about 3 in a row for actually the one that I'm doing today, the Unique Honeybee. Yeah, I'm actually sort of redoing that, but on a much higher level for those of you who are beekeepers and expect a little more. And don't ask me what that message up there is. But anyway, the library would love to have you do it. You'd be amazed. Community events, farmers markets, they would love to have you do a presentation. This was Molbach's nursery in Wendell. I have some of the posters and stuff. I can help you out. Return to the Salmon Celebration in Sultan. Made it 1 year, not this last year because they canceled. And then there's so many opportunities to go out and talk to the public. So the presentation you were waiting for. It says the Unique Honeybee. I suppose Unique's overused. I think Incredible might be better. So I'll try to say incredible instead of unique. People say it's almost unique or it's very unique, and you're going, wait a minute, unique is unique. Do we really appreciate the honeybee enough? I mean, I know we know it's a honeybee, but do we really give it credit for all the wonderful things it does? Or do we just think it's this fuzzy little beneficial vegan who provides us with that lovely honey? Or do we see it as a little instinct-driven robot performing unvarying tasks, doing what the queen mother says? You know, we have different images, and then we start beekeeping and we change our images. We learn so much about bees. So I have some thoughts I wanted to share with you today on the ABCs of the honeybee on 3 levels: the individual bee, the super organism, and then a species as a whole. And I want to talk about the ABCs: the anatomy, the behavior, the communication, and sex. That's always a great way to really spice up a boring scientific discussion. But in anatomy, yeah, what's really boring is you realize that out of 50,000 bees in a hive, almost nobody's getting any. No, I'm sorry. Okay, avoid the adult jokes here. I'm sorry, but I can't resist it at my age. Okay, when I was younger, it meant things. Now everybody just laughs. The little white-haired lady talking about that. Okay, back getting serious. The anatomy. On an individual level, they are insects. You know a lot about insects: head and thorax and abdomen and 6 legs and wings. And I shouldn't say a few insects have specialized body parts, but specialized to the degree that the honeybee has them is incredible. And not all insects go through complete metamorphosis, which people study with the monarch butterfly. And I right now vote that we all go to the school boards and tell them we don't want the monarch butterfly, which it doesn't even exist on this side of the Rockies anyway. And we want to do the complete metamorphosis of the honeybee. I volunteer to teach that. Any classroom that would like me. That would make a lot more sense than the monarch, which we are never going to see. Now, a few insects can claim that they are vegan. Even some of them, even as juvenile and adult. Usually, they're vegan. And like those wasps, yeah, they may be vegan as adults, but they're feeding as many carcasses as they can harvest from our honeybee hives to their young. And some of them do have economic value. And there's been a little flap in the news recently about the stingless bees, and you can get honey from them. Yeah, tiny little teaspoonfuls you can. And they are beneficial. Important. A lot of them are important for pollination. Not just bees, but there's flies and all kinds that are. And they're often an indirect source of food for people and animals, or they are the food themselves. But they don't provide a food like honey. So we're going to start right off with looking at how different the honeybee is and why it's called the Flying Swiss Army Knife. And that is like my husband's dream gift over there on the right-hand side, although there's one that I think has 300 little arms or something on it. Go look at Swiss Army knives. I never knew they looked like that until I was trying to get him a present. But look at all those little things like the compass, and there's little magnifying glasses, and there's all kinds of little mandible. If you think of it like a honeybee, all kinds of little mandible gripper type things. The little screws and hooks and yeah, does remind me. As we go through the parts of the honeybee, you start going, yeah. And there's nothing simple about the honeybee. Everything is incredibly complex. Okay, butterflies, yeah, they suck up nectar, right? Do honeybees do something that simple? No, they don't have a tube they uncoil. Instead, they take like 3 parts of their mouth and put it together and form. It's like a straw. They kind of roll it together, and then they got a little pump in there too. But that isn't all they do with their mouth. Okay, butterflies do the suction. That's nice. Some probe, but honeybees do food exchange, trophallaxis. They can clamp, they can grip like pliers, or they can cut like scissors. They shape wax. They do all these things, not just the little straw function of a butterfly. They taste, and they do something called a proboscis extension response, PER. And this is fun to look up and Google this. My neighbor next door actually took these pictures with her smartphone, and she's not really a photographer. She just caught this picture of a honeybee landing, and you may not realize what this is. That's kind of dragging. It looks like kind of like a tongue hanging. The honeybees, part of their proboscis is hinged underneath their chin, and it flips outward, and that's what's happening. And that extension is called the Proboscis Extension response. Why is it important? I hope you all remember your high school biology science. Somewhere they probably mentioned conditioning. Could be in psychology courses too. And they mentioned Pavlov's dog. You ring the bell when you feed the dog, and after a while, the poor dog expects to be fed when you feed it. When it hears the bell ring, it expects to be fed, and so it starts drooling. Bees do the same, only their drool is a proboscis extension response. Okay, if you, wherever there's food, instead of ringing a bell, you put the smell of something, you can train them, sort of like you would train the dog up on the upper right, drug sniffing, munition sniffing, something dog. You can train a hive. You're training individual bees who then go back and tell the rest of the hive what to look for. And you can train bees to go towards a smell. The military is using this, and there's lots of interesting research that's been done on this. They've used it to locate leaking munitions, things like ammonium nitrate. Think fertilizer, that's where you know ammonium nitrate from, but it's also a bomb component. Cadavers exude horrible things called cadaverine, putrescine, things like that. Okay, the military has figured out that they can take a hive of bees, train them to a certain scent, put the sugar water right next to whatever scent it is, chemical scent that they want them to find. And then I put a bunch of stuff here I don't really expect you to read, but it was really, really interesting. They are talking about how good their perception of chemicals is. And of course, they're motivated by that syrup sugar feeder. Oh dear, Jane's back off again. I hope she can get in, stay in. That it's like a drop of ink in one of the largest tanker trucks that you can think of used to haul gasoline. That's a part per billion. Now, bees can sense a part per trillion. Now, you could train that hive in a few months, close it up at night, take it to wherever you want the bees to sense, to go out and find. And you can watch, and there's other apparatus they use to see which way the bees are going and get them sort of kind of like triangulation. They're going to figure out where they're going to go. What they're looking for the scent. And once they find it, they set up the beeline. They can also put RFIDs, little chips on them. Now, it would take months to train a dog to do the same thing. Literally, it's minutes to train bees. So they are thinking that they could also use this to get bees to pollinate specific crops too. You could spray something that the bees are attracted to on a crop, and then you would know that crop got pollinated. And you would also know that the bees didn't go someplace else where somebody had sprayed a pesticide. This could be really useful. But this is just on the basis of a very specialized piece of equipment that they carry on their mouth parts. Oh, here's some of the things that they use. Anise licorice flavor was what they used for the control to make sure that they were responding to the chemical when they got the syrup reward. Yeah, cadaverine and putrescine. Yeah, seriously, that's what it says. Oh, let's see here. And you know that bees have all these little characteristics, those long tongues, and then the pieces. This kind of shows the pieces that come together. I don't think this is a honeybee. Yeah, they put a lot of bees in here. I got these from Xerxes, some of these pictures. But pollen carrying, oh yeah. This is because this bee is carrying pollen all over, not exclusively on the baskets. Here's a bumblebee, which is making pollen baskets, corpiculae. And pollen. In itself, the entire bee seems to be so adapted to pick up pollen from its fuzzy little hairs, which researchers who are finding uses for bees have called bees the flying dust mop. They have so many little hairs on them that you can use them to measure the particulates that are in the air that they flew through. If you think about it, you collect that off them. I don't know if they have to sacrifice the bees or not. They might have to. They're extremely hairy. They get hairy on their eyes. Had to put that in because it's so. You need some good trivia from tonight. And that pollen trapping is not the whole story on pollen gathering. I wrote a paper for this for my master beekeeping certificate, and it was much more complicated than I ever thought. I thought they just went out and got it. Yeah, maybe they waggle dance to say where they got it and whether it was a good source or not. But I didn't realize how much feedback from other bees was involved. And later on, I'm going to talk more about complex behaviors. Bees are the most studied insect, and they're going to continue to be the most studied insect because they're not just important economically to us, but they are a super organism, which is the part of my talk we're going to be going into next. This is individual anatomy. They've got taste and they can detect odor and fragrance, and they can communicate with pheromones and physically. And that's tons of talks right there. And every part of their body, here's the pollen carrying part, the actual specialized little bristles that they can put it on. How they make a pollen pellet is a fascinating thing, and how they attach it to their leg. How they, like I said, there's parts of the mouth that come together to make a proboscis, to actually let them drink a liquid. But inside of them, they also have every system that we have. We have respiratory, digestive, nervous, we have an immune system, and the hemolymph, the blood system and circulation. They have all of those individually. But a lot of them they also have as a super organism, because they are working, and this is where we're used to dealing with them, is with the hive, and we admire our bees individually. Here, I was talking about the digestive system, the respiratory system. We have to heat our bodies, produce our own heat. We reproduce, some of us are lucky or unlucky enough to, and we defend ourselves. We respire good air in, bad air out. We need cooling, we do it. The bee hive does that as a whole. Remember your bees fanning at the entrances, how they engineered and set up their whole hive so that air could move through it. It's not a garbled up jumble in there. It's highly, highly organized. Food collection. Yeah, we feed ourselves. We store some food and we digest, and we take care of the hygiene and our immune systems. But the hive as a whole has to do that. And it works as a unit in an amazing way that isn't just something we can sit and go, wow. It's actually used in research. I'll get into some research on how groups of people and groups of other animals can be modeled and studied through bees. Because we're going into this superorganism. A few other insects are, sometimes they call them superorganisms, and they have some social structure. They have a somewhat reproductive caste. A lot of them are not fixed. A worker female can become a queen if needed. And that's a virtual impossibility in the honeybee. There's a teeny weeny exception. Ask me after the talk if you really want to know. And it's not in North America. They build nests. They live together as a community. Sometimes it's more like apartment buildings with your own rooms, though. They're globally distributed, I think, but not, I don't think on the level, except for the fleas and the cockroaches. Those I think you have everywhere you have humans. Other than that, I think the insect that has the largest global distribution would probably be the honeybee. Beneficial one, not a pest like fleas and cockroaches. They progressively feed their young. They stay around and raise their young is what that means. They don't just make a little food, stick it on the egg and say, okay, good luck, bye. I'm going to go off and die now. Like a mason bee. Doesn't really have a choice. Use social. When we talk about super organism, we're talking about social that's raised to a high level. And that EU means kind of like true, like most social. The most social form. Not just living together in a group, but cooperating on the brood care, overlapping the generations, not an overwintered queen who comes out of her dormancy, starts a whole new hive, and there's no overlapping. She has to raise her offspring, then they can raise more offspring, but there's complete break there every year. And it's not the same kind of overlapping generations that bees have. And that complete division reproductively, that's something. Now, I'm assuming everybody in here already took beginner, so I'm leaping over things like polyethism. The idea that the little bee, and I have these cute pictures here. Those of you who've already taken beginner, you recognize this. Bee is an egg, a larva pupates, it chews its way out of its little wax prison. It comes out and immediately starts cleaning, house cleaning. Then it's a nurse bee. And then it's secreting wax and helping build. And then it goes on guard duty. Somewhere in there, it's also doing undertaker mortician duty. And the last stage of its life is foraging. And this is an incredible plan, an incredible design, because risk to self increases toward the end. A bee does half of its duties before it ever goes out to forage, which is the riskiest thing it's ever going to do. I like to think of it as, instead of 4 stages of development you were taught in complete metamorphosis, instead of thinking of it that way, think of it as egg, larva, pupa, newly emerged, but not really a full adult, teenagerhood. Why do I say that? And actually, drones and queens don't do this. I'm emphasizing the worker bee. Everybody talks too much about the queens and the drones. I'll talk some about them. But emphasizing the worker bee, it has to go through a teenager period. It can't do everything. And the polyethism, the changing its jobs throughout its life, that adolescence is because it's still maturing its glands. Just like a teenager, it comes out and it looks full grown, but it ain't got no. Okay, sorry, this is mom speaking, mom of teenagers speaking. It doesn't necessarily have the common sense, the wisdom, the experience, and the ability to perform all the tasks. Just ask your 13-year-old to take out the garbage. Those of you who are blessed with a teenager who does take out the garbage, thank God. But for most of us, we recognize that the body is developed before everything else is developed. And so that there's this long teenagerhood, which I would really say, I would argue, that a bee is an adult when it goes out to forage and has finished developing hypopharyngeal glands and mandibular salivary glands and wax glands, and then it doesn't need those anymore, so it moves on to being a senior citizen bee, I guess, and then finally to death. Why is all this important? All these individual things that a bee can do, and all the division of labor, and the organization of a superorganism all come together in things that only a superorganism can do. The mason bee couldn't even dream of having a brood nest. And even the bees that do produce comb, like on this side, I should look this up. If this is one of these, this is the giant bee here, dorsata, and this one's a honeybee, and this one is either, I think it's Florea, the dwarf honeybee. They make, let's see, dorsata especially makes, and I think this one too, makes single comb nests in the tropics. It's warm enough. They can always move. There's other sources of food. They don't make a big nest and defend it. When they build comb, yes, they build comb and cells and they secrete wax and all that, but it's not very efficient. It's not their system. In ours, it is very, very carefully orchestrated by a whole set of behaviors that we're going to talk about genetics. And this single comb with all different ages messed up together is not as efficient as this comb over here, where the queen laid in a spiral pattern, and they're now emerging in a spiral pattern. And then she's going to come back and lay in that again. And on the edges of this are the food that the bees need to feed to the offspring, to the developing larvae. And the brood are all together that need the same heat to develop. It is a very efficient system. And people have diagrammed it. Here's a great diagram showing this isn't haphazard. And even in the wintertime, when they cluster together, there is an organization to the way they cluster. It isn't that any individual is making the decision. It's that it's wired into them certain behaviors, and they interact with each other and the environment in certain ways to get certain behaviors. And we end up with, here's an infrared camera, a nice cluster, very warm in the middle to keep the queen at least 68 to 70 degrees in the winter, or if there's brood in there, 92 to 95. Oh dear, Jane's getting bumped off. Maybe she'll give me a call and we'll figure out what's wrong. Okay, and some more of how this 3D turns into the slices we see on our frames. Or if we lift, we're cutting it in half. And how this is so incredible. There's no other insect that does. Yes, they heat their hive and such, but nothing like this. Let me see. Clustering. The whole behavior of clustering is unique to the honeybee. Instead of going dormant, because that's not what bees are doing, they are achieving homeostasis for the hive. Themselves, they're cold-blooded, but for the hive as a whole in the cluster, it is actually what you'd call warm-blooded as a super organism. It can heat a core and maintain temperature. Homeostasis is the maintaining same, and stasis, state. In people, it's you're getting a certain temperature, particularly. You want a certain temperature maintained no matter how cold your surroundings are. But the honeybee is a tropical insect by its heredity and its background many years ago, eons ago. And it made two incredible adaptations when it moved farther and farther into the temperate zone. It started laying up surplus stores and clustering. Those are very complex behaviors, and they're being studied a lot by researchers because they're so fascinating. They're incredible. And when they forage, they have incredible patterns on that of how they pick, if they can, the best source in a large amount. And sometimes people say, I've planted the beautiful pollinator garden for my bees. It's full of all different kinds of flowers, and the bees are going straight past it because there's something else they would prefer, and there's a large amount of it. And they're still Europeans at heart. I'm sorry, they still like the European dishes. They want those invasive weeds that the Noxious Weed Board keeps trying to get rid of. Swarming is an incredibly complex behavior. If you want to have some real respect for it, watch this video by Tom Seeley. He wrote the book called Honeybee Democracy, and he also did a YouTube video, I think for the National Honey Show. It's also titled Honeybee Democracy, and he discovered bees making and managed to actually record bees headbutting each other and making a beep noise when they were communicating. They were voting, what they were doing was voting for the new place that half the hive was going to move to with the old queen. And they do a waggle dance, and each scout that has a different place that they would like to go does their waggle dance for theirs, right? Just like for nectar and pollen, I've got the better source. And when they've had enough and they don't want, when one of them decides they really have a better source, and they're very insistent, they will actually come up and headbutt with a beat the waggle dancer they disagree with. We, as a beginner, we tell you queen's pipe, worker's pipe, and you can call this beep, you can call it piping, but there's actual full piping recorded of worker bees doing it. Pheromones isn't just the queen, it's all the cast, and the communication is not just pheromones. There's a lot of touch. There's like in a waggle dance with nectar, they would be trading a little bit of the nectar taste. The one who comes back and reports, hey, you wouldn't believe what I found. This is so good. And they give them a little taste. Or they're sharing, because they just love being so close to each other. They're sharing their odors, and maybe they picked up an odor from that pollen source. I know it's not something I like to think of, being in a crowd sharing odors, but bees love being together. Tom Seeley, when he was studying all this behavior in the swarming, and he studied foraging and such too, and feral hives, and a lot of very interesting topics on the individual level and on the super colony level. And one of the things he found that was totally fascinating, you've got to read some of his work on the swarming sort of communication. When everybody in the hive, is the half that's left and has landed on a branch, is deciding where to go, they don't take everybody's opinion and weight it equally. It's not one bee, one vote sort of thing. They weight the opinion for the expertise of the bee. The scouts tend to be the older foragers. He kind of likes that the senior citizens get listened to in a swarm decision. They actually are discussing it. They are flexible. They are responding to feedback. They're cooperating. These are very advanced behaviors. I don't think there's another insect that does it. It's been well studied. It is fascinating. Here's a flow diagram. I just had to put this flow diagram up. This is seriously, there are a lot of papers on this. It's not just us. We're not just crazy because we're so fascinated with our bees. And have you seen that t-shirt that says, beekeeper, warning, may start talking bees? Because when we get on our topics, we just kind of go crazy. And we really miss those in-person meetings. I really hope we get to have those back in our conferences. Let me see, I can do this a little bit bigger. Yeah, I did a little bit bigger here. Because look at this. This is the feedback type loops thing. I bet computer programmers are seeing it, and logic students are seeing it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's MBAs here who see business equivalents of how you get flowcharts going and how you have to go back and check and report back, receive a signal, ignore the signal, up the signal. This is really, really neat. And this is just one little part of what they do, swarming. On everyday level, they're doing these Michael dances. This is the only decoded insect language, as that's what my source claimed. And this was the Nobel Prize granted for bee research to Karl von Frisch. As far as I know, it's the only one. And he was granted it not just because it related to bees, but it relates to all living beings, all animal behavior. So the communications and the decision-making that we see when we look at our hives, watch our bees, we also see it made on a bigger scale. And it's really important to give the honeybee credit for that. We see the swarming, hopefully not half the hive going off, but yeah, we do see it. And with the preparation for it, and we're trying to stop it sometimes, and we see the brood raising cooperation, which is just, now that you see it in 3D, once you're in your hive seeing it in 3D, it is efficient and it works. And there's nobody who's standing around directing and doing no work. Everybody's working. Even the decision to abscond is a hive decision. They reach that in some form of consensus. It's not exactly a democratic vote, one individual gets a vote, but they reach it through all these complex behaviors and communication they do. I was trying to write that paper on forage. I got halfway through writing the paper and I realized I had picked too big of a topic. Did you realize that when bees are deciding forage, the first thing they have to decide is what they're going to forage? There's at least 4 types: nectar, pollen, water, and propolis. And that's constantly changing, even day to day, even hour to hour, what they need. The hive starts overheating at a certain time of the day, but it cools down at night. So, they needed it at a certain time. Nectar outweighs pollen generally. If bees can get nectar, they'll pick it over pollen, except when they really need the pollen to raise brood. The house bees, you would think the foraging decisions would be made by the foragers. Well, stop and think, that isn't logical. Who knows what you need? The bees that are in the house that have never gone out to forage. They're communicating the needs and somehow facilitating the decisions. And there's an incredible flexibility and adaptability in this system. Each bee is not the same in terms of forage. They know this. They know that some individual foragers just tend toward nectar, tend toward pollen, tend toward water, tend toward propolis. Seriously, it apparently is part of the incredible genetic diversity of the honeybee. Not only do they have individual propensities, I mean, there's these groups of bees, and some are not strictly nectar or pollen bees. They will collect both. About 15% was what I read in one paper. And then you will read some places that a bee that collects nectar only collects nectar on a trip. Well, actually, they found that some of them collect both. Some take a little nectar to make the pollen ball with them. Some collect enough nectar while they're out to help make that pollen basket. And on top of that, within each propensity, each ability or trait that they have, each bee has its own individual threshold. Okay, threshold's a weird concept. The best way I can explain it, and I put a slide in here. I didn't put a slide here to explain it. If the first scout bee that goes out in the morning and comes back has found a pretty good source of nectar or pollen, and they do the waggle dance and they get everybody out there, and by noon they got everybody out there. But maybe there's a scout that finds a better source at afternoon. If every bee available rushed out with the same enthusiasm and was foraging that other source, the better source would never get exploited. The hive would actually lose out. There are some bees that they won't get up and go until you get on their case and make them. They actually have a shake and wake, they call it, strategy. There actually are bees who say, get up, get your lazy butts out of here and get out there and forage. We need water, we need pollen, whatever. They actually shake, they put their front legs on and they shake and wake. And that spectrum of thresholds means there's always bees to take on a new job, a new duty. It gives a flexibility and adaptability that you wouldn't get if you didn't have the different genetics. And it could, I don't know if every bee in the hive could be different genetically. I wouldn't be surprised if they could be, due to something called homologous recombination. So I've been talking about these complex behaviors, groups, reaching consensus, getting things done without anybody clearly being a leader. No top down here. And they study this in animals, schools, fish, flocks, robotics. They try to actually use some of this in robotics to help artificial intelligence. Robots have to figure out how, I mean, I don't think Roomba's very smart, but even it knows how to vacuum a room. But what if you needed a more complex task done? Roomba does actually what a paramecium does. When I was in high school biology, they were teaching us. A paramecium is a little animal that when it's single cell, yeah, I think they're single cell. When they come up, they hit something and they always come back off. They hit it and they back up at like a 15-degree angle or something and they take off again. And so they keep doing this until they work their way out of whatever jam they are. There's no reasoning. It's just a one system. Bees, it isn't that way. They're constantly receiving input. It's really neat how they can put little colors on them, these little dots, and then do time-lapse photography. Can you see what they're doing here? Isn't this neat? You get a whole bunch of bees, and you can actually get bees all the same age, get them as closely related as possible, same queen, not related. There's all different things they can do, and they can actually number every individual bee. These little dots that are glued onto the thorax, you can do numbers like 0 to 99, and you can do those in like 7 colors, however many you can detect. And then you notice there's a dot on the abdomen as well. They can do thousands of bees because you have 7 colors times 100 numbers times maybe the other 7 colors on the abdomen. And people record this with cameras. And then they can slow-mo it, get the computers, hopefully, to do the counting and analysis using observation hives. I want one of these. I want about 4 frames high, permanently installed in my house. I haven't talked my husband into that yet, though. And that's Georgia Tech that's working on that. They're one of the places that's really, really working on it. Okay, we kind of went quickly through some behavior and some communication. I'm going to come back and now we're going to talk about sex in the superorganism. Okay, it's not anything Hollywood. The superorganism, it reproduces by splitting in two, swarming. Old queen goes off with half, roughly, and then the other half stays with the new queen that is emerging. Probably hasn't yet. Ideally hasn't yet. And once you're a reproducer, you're a reproducer. And if you're not a reproducer, you're not a reproducer. The duties in all cases are highly specialized for the ones that actually do reproduce. They do what they do in a very specific way. And it's colony survival that matters. It is not an individual. If the colony survives, everyone benefits. Acceptable risk to self depends on your caste. Caste being queen, drone, worker. The queen, she is absolutely, she's in the center of that winter cluster. When we always say that she has 3 duties. When you are a beekeeper and you're trying to find the queen, she has only 3 duties: lay eggs, emit pheromones, and hide from the beekeeper. She's not out there to defend the hive. There's no acceptable risk to the queen. No risk is the level acceptable. Workers, they can give their life for the hive. And drones, sorry, they are really expendable. But controlling those reproductive castes is an investment of resources still, and it's a strategy to achieve a goal. This is incredible because the honeybee is the only one that does this. Now we know about those queens. We know they go up there and they mate with 10 to 20 drones in the wild blue yonder, whoever they want. We have no control over that unless we're on an island. We're geographically isolated. We have flooded the air with drones, and that's really difficult to do, of a certain type that we want the queens to mate with. Or we can artificially inseminate the queens. Okay. They are high investment for the hive. They only make so many. Every time a queen, older queen, takes off with half the hive, that's a huge risk. Half the hive is at risk. She's not easily replaced, although bees have got it streamlined. Did you notice that the queen is the one who can be replaced fastest? From the time they realize, we are missing a queen, grab an egg that was laid 3 days ago, feed it royal jelly. They've got a queen in 13 days. Whereas drones take 24 and workers take 21 days. Okay. They have to minimize the risk to her. And that's their strategy, because she's carrying all of the genes that the hive has. Especially once she's mated, she is extremely high priority. Drones, on the other hand, make up a whole mess of the population, but they're really not considered important. But it's sort of the flooding the area with that hive's genes. There's a certain amount of strategy to this. It's very seasonally dependent. The drones are expendable, which means if you're running out of food, you can kick the drones out, even in the late July when there's a dearth. You don't have to feed those drones. On the other hand, if you've got extra honey, more than you could store, more than you need, why not feed a few drones and increase your genetic odds of the hive continuing on genetically? Okay, this is already weird mating behavior, right? Extreme polyandry, and they go up in the wild blue yonder and they're racing along. And the drone dies as soon as he mates if he's successful. And the queen just continues on like nothing ever happened, and she can mate with a drone every 2 seconds. This is weird. But the genetics are even weirder. There's something called recombination that happens to the genes that doesn't fit anything you were ever told in high school biology unless you took very advanced. But let's start with the livestock genetics type we all learned, And that's bad enough already because we know about that extreme polyandry. Even though the queen does it all at once, maybe a few days, but there's a very short mating period there, and she's mated for her life, even if she lives. Some people report as much as like 8 years. It's getting more and more common for her to only live 2 years. 3 is starting to get long-lived nowadays. I think it's pesticides, shipping conditions, environmental stress, a lot of things. Maybe even some genetics. But all of this results in extreme diversity, even just the livestock part. Okay, there are a couple of diagrams, and this one on the lower left, okay, if she's mating with up to 20 drones, let's just start with 2. Even if she gave exactly the same half of her genes to each of her female offspring and gave each of her female offspring one of the, well, a drone only has one set of genes. So that's why it only shows drone 1 as contributing to be matched. His half, do I have the next slide? Does the next slide explain this? Better. Okay, this next slide explains it. I was getting worried there. Sex is determined in a lot of insects. This is not the only insects that it's determined that way. By you've got 2 sets of the chromosomes, you're complete. You're a female. Woo! Okay, if you only have half, you're incomplete. You're a male. Sorry, I know that's the reverse of things I used to teach back in the Dark Ages, but males are incomplete females. And truthfully, there are no male genetics because a male in bees only receives half of his mother's genes. Really, all he does is take half of queen's genes and pass it on. It isn't really like there's any male genes. He just gets half. Now, going back to that other one, because he only has half, that's all he can give. She can give 2 different halves. So all of livestock genetics, the way we think of genetics and biology, when we were explaining Mendelian genetics is explained, okay, he can only give the same genes. And actually, every sperm produced by a drone is identical because he just got his mother's half of her genes. So he can only produce 2 types of offspring by 1 queen. But if she mates with another drone and uses that sperm to fertilize eggs, then the hive gets 2 other possible combinations of genetics in worker. And I know this is too much if you haven't already been through this, but if you've been kind of thinking about it, saying this is crazy. Okay, so here's 4. Now, if you made 4, and then where would they be related to each other? Okay, this half sister's here. Now they're trying to show it here. Okay, now we're only up to 4 drones. Take this to like 20, and we're going to be going crazy. The genetics get really, really complicated. But before we go any farther, why would you want drones to only have 1 of each type of gene and not have 2 sets? 2 sets kind of seems like more mixing, more assortment and such. Well, the reason that scientists give is that if a drone has only 1 gene of each type, whatever that gene codes for, right, it probably isn't going to code for egg laying directly, but if it codes for flying ability, disease resistance, if it is for immune system health, if there are genes, if one of them is bad, when he gets up trying to mate with the queen in the wild blue yonder, and he's competing with thousands of other drones, what's going to happen is that he is going to not be able to outcompete him. He isn't going to be successful. It's the one with the best genes that should get to the queen. Things happen. Maybe he just happens to show up first and he's lucky. Okay, maybe that happens. I'm looking at a picture here of drone comb. And in this drone comb, what is interesting is you probably see nothing particularly wrong with this unless you're an experienced beekeeper. And then you look at the larvae and you're saying, are they really supposed to be that color? That's a funny color. Maybe it's just the camera. And then you look at these white where the trachea are clearly outlined and you go, that's not quite right. I think this was a very small example of European foul brood in a damp, cold, wet spring like we have almost every year in this climate. And that damp, cool, wet is sort of selecting for which drone can resist it, has the genetics that are best able to survive a touch of whatever this larvae is being exposed to, that's making it look a little unhealthy. The ones that do better are the ones that are going to be successfully breeding. They're going to be outflying the others, outcompeting, and passing their genes on. So any that have a defective gene, a gene that's not as good for immune system resistance to whatever this disease or stress is. Those are the ones that aren't, only the ones with the better gene are going to make it. I hope that example makes sense, because it doesn't make sense. Why in the world would you produce thousands of drones every year that never get a chance to mate? There's only so many mating per queen, and there's just no guarantee. And drones eat a lot, so they are pretty big. They absorb a lot of resources, I would say. Okay, the genetics. This is from a really interesting website, these diagrams, where somebody started doing this, and my head exploded about this time. Here's the queens mate with 10 to 20 drones. Okay, so I think they just put 10 here, only 10. And then they put different genes, these little bars on here to show you different genes. And then they started looking at all the possible combinations, and they couldn't even put them on the page. This is a diversity which is incredible. And it's for all the genes that honeybees have. One of the, and all the traits that we want that are important to us as beekeepers are really multigenetic. There's more than one gene that determines a trait. For example, can we get resistance to Varroa genetically by letting the bees breed, or by artificial inseminating, or whatever? Is there a way for us to do that? And so they've been studying something called Varroa sensitive hygiene. It's a whole topic in itself, lots of papers written on it. And the idea is that the bees will be able to recognize which larvae have been badly impacted, fed on by the Varroa mites. See the Varroa mites in there feeding on the pupa, and they will take out the ones that are unhealthy and not try to finish raising them out. Somebody tried, okay, this is from davecushman.net, which is an actual website. He's long since dead, and another beekeeper is keeping the website going because his diagrams were so good and his thought processes were so good. He's actually British, which is not a mark against him at all. I like British people a lot. But sometimes he writes things in a funny way if you are on the website. But it was so good, his diagrams and such, and how he puts together. And this was where he was looking at just a couple of genes for Varroa sensitive hygiene. The idea that the bees could fight the Varroa by, and he has two traits here, uncapping cells, removing brood. There's two different things. And what if you had it or didn't have it, or had a dominant for it or recessive? This is going back if you took biology in high school. This is really simple. They now think it's more like 7 genes or something. Now, if you thought that this wasn't confusing enough, this is where we throw in the wild card, homologous recombination. Can't happen in a drone, but it can happen in the queen when she's producing the eggs. In homologous recombination, maybe the blue one here has all the dominant traits you want. And this one over here has other traits. In homologous recombination, this form is crossing over, which is one form of homologous recombination, actually. It is possible for traits you thought were going to go together. Maybe you need 7 traits, 7 genes to get a certain trait like Varroa sensitive hygiene. Okay, suppose that's true. And you think you're doing pretty well. You got bees. Oh boy, I got a dominant and recessive form. Then this crossover happens, and suddenly maybe the blue gene that you needed to make the other genes work successfully so that the bees could exhibit the Varroa sensitive hygiene behavior, maybe one of them's missing now. It's on the wrong chromosome. This gets really complicated, and they get into mathematical probabilities and such. So going back to something like pollen foraging, there's a lot of types of pollen out there. There's a lot of forage that the bees could be doing, pollen and other ones. Inside of each one, in each type of forager, there's a threshold at which that forager will go out and try to make trips out, or it will hesitate. It needs a little more shake and wake, a little more vigorous of a waggle dance, or a bigger taste of the nectar reward. But in all of tens of thousands of bees in the hive, you're almost, with this crazy diversity mess, guaranteed a solution can arise. It's been working for millions of years. I know I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but it's such a fascinating topic. Just start looking at it and you get more and more interested in it. And we try to circumvent the whole evolutionary business by things like artificial insemination, which they like to call instrumental insemination. And they do this to poor little queen bees. First, you take the drones and you convince them they're basically mating, and you make them push the little endophallus out, and then you, with a micro syringe, micro capillary pipette tube, you pick up the semen, and then you mix it together because you want to have a fully mated queen, so you're going to need like the 10 to 20, maybe you do 30 drones, and then you mix that together, all those different types, and you actually do this. This is kind of gross. If you can't handle this, that's okay. I think this is really gross to watch. And then they take this poor queen, and they do anesthetize her, I guess. I don't know if that's really help with a little CO2 and carbon dioxide. And then they inject very carefully, and apparently it works. They claim it works. Okay, that was so gross, that picture. It reminds me of the delivery room. Let's return to anatomy. And because I've got just a few minutes left, because I really should stop so that people don't talk all night. I'm stopping at 8, okay? I promise. Let's return to the anatomy. Things that weren't possible for an individual bee become possible for a superorganism. They can engineer. They've got all this advanced communication. They got all this specialized body parts. They've got this progression of duties, the polyechism that they do from the time they emerge until they basically die. And they do different duties, but it's on a sliding scale. They can adjust it. They can go back and do an earlier duty. They can be pushed forward to do another duty. And they can respond to environmental changes, whatever, they can do it. That gives them so much flexibility with that propensity already of an individual bee with a spectrum of thresholds among the bees. This is just a nice picture of an oxalic acid crystals covered bee. It just looks so nice. It was so pretty. Showed the hairs really well. Okay, first of all, the bees, they don't have any of these instruments. They start by using their bodies to measure everything. And when you think about it, that automatically gives them an incredible uniformity. Bees are almost all the same size. Isn't this genius? When the queen, if you ever do have your bees relaxed and you're holding the brood nest frame and she decides to lay in front of you, watch her. She measures the cell with her front legs. That tells her whether or not she's going to fertilize the egg at the time of laying, turns around and backs her butt in, and she lays the egg that is needed for that size cell, because she measured using her front legs basically as calipers. She used them to measure the diameter of the cell, and smaller is worker, fertilize the egg, larger is don't fertilize the egg. And she does it as she turns around. Isn't that amazing? They do a pretty good job of leveling and spacing things. It's amazing what they do. And gravity. They sense gravity. They know how thick to make the wax. Every once in a while you get wonky comb. Someday I want a good explanation for why there's just sometimes mid-season, I see some really weird looking comb. And I'm not sure what's wrong. But generally speaking, they not only make the comb even, but they make the thickness even. And that's amazing. And that's a pretty small measurement. But again, their bodies are small. They make it support 25 times its weight. And the way they do this is they push down with the mandibles and measure how much the surface flexes with their antennae. Like stepping on a floor and feeling how much it gives. Oh, we need another floor joist here. Well, I hope you put enough floor joists in before you put your floor in. And then straight, how do they know which way is straight? They don't have a plumb line. I mean, we always think the ancient Egyptians are pretty good. Bees have got them beat. in the backs of their heads, they have a little organ here that senses if how the head is positioned in relationship to the rest of the body, and that tells them up and down. That's their plumb line built into the little bodies. Compasses. You might have heard something. I know there was a thing going on the internet, which isn't exactly accurate, but it was interesting. It was saying you have to orient your hives with magnetic north or something like that. I can't remember. That comes partly out of a study where accidentally, I think it was accidental. I don't think they were looking for this result. Scientists were gathering up feral hives, boxing them, and when they put them in the box, if they didn't give them artificial foundation like we do to control, most of us do that to control the way the bees are going to do the hives. And so we have movable comb, which is a legal requirement. They found that if they didn't give them an orientation, the bees would orient to the same magnetic direction they had used in the feral hive. Now that sounds interesting. Oh, they remembered. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is somehow they reached at that direction that they were going to pick, and it's not magnetic north or so many degrees off or something like that. Every hive can be different. But once the direction is set, you would think, oh, well, they just build from the top down or from one way. No, if you watched your bees in your hives, you know they don't. They are drawing out of more than one frame at a time. If they do the same thing, and they do in the wild, how do they know if they start at one end of the hive that the combs they're making are going to be parallel to the ones at the other end? They actually have some way that they reach cooperative consensus, the decision to orient the combs in a certain direction, because they are not working from one end to the other. They're working from all different directions. And if they didn't do this, it would be a mess. Isn't that an amazing decision? I don't even know how they communicate that. Do you know how long it would probably take engineers in a boardroom? I just have this meeting. I can just see them arguing about what direction is the best one. And somehow the bees just get it done. Then once they know what direction they're going to be able to comb in, they have this incredible ability to excrete their own building material. No other insect does this. Others have saliva and mix it with wood pulp or something, but they don't excrete their own building material. This is unique. I knew I was going to use that word. Incredible. How's that? But I think it is also unique in the animal world. And they're not just going to slap it on any old way. They are going to use the most efficient form, the most economical shape-wise, the least area lost to dead little corners and dead ends. And hexagonal cells are that. And not just the long sides, but the bottom is actually shaped. I think I've got a better picture of it coming up. Here, it's shaped into these three parts that fit into the other side. Bees actually, when you don't give them plastic foundation, they build comb faster. They can work from both sides, and they're working through. And they don't have to deal with your flat surface that you beekeepers keep trying to give them all the time. And it's not natural for them. When they've made these are now modular. They can use them for anything they want to use them for. Although when they are in the drone brood rearing mode, especially earlier in the year and the supply of food is good, they tend to, and they're in reproductive mode, they're thinking about swarming because bees always have that on their mind. We could make another hive. Very modular, very multi-purpose, sort of like what we do. We use the Langstroth hive boxes and frames, and we are proud of the fact that we can interchange and such. But they don't just do that. They maintain space for airflow. We call it bee space. And when I teach it, I explain bee space is the 1/4 inch to 3/8. And the 3/8 is the maximum. And they will put comb in there if it's more than 3/8. 3/8 is the amount of space it takes for a bee on one comb to pass a bee on the other comb back to back. They actually do rub each other's hair off over time. Bees get bald as they get older. But that's how much space 3/8 is. The 1/4 inches one can go by. But they aren't just doing it so they can pass each other. It's also a ventilation, heating, storage, its efficiency. It's incredible engineering efficiency. Oh, and while we're at it, if you didn't know that the inside of airplane rings are frequently honeycomb structure, I had to put this picture in to make sure you saw this. I guess they do it in satellite walls and such. You get the maximum strength for the amount of weight. So I just think this is so great. They're little mandibles and mouth parts and stuff. They can, just like they have these wax shaping tools that artists use. And if you look at it, it is the most efficient way to do it. So I raced through. Yeah, I don't want to take any longer. Let me see. I just wanted to point out, I know I glossed over a lot of things, but their wintering behavior, the fact they can cluster and store up honey, is incredible. They're a super organism in the finest sense of the word. They work as a whole. It's an incredible, it's not exactly a democracy. It's like a consensus, almost telepathic. Oh dear. I wonder if Jane managed to find another way to get on. The dance language. The only one's really been decoded, and they can say it means this with animals. Those progressive life duties that can be shifted. The teenagerhood they have. Weird mating behavior. They're weirder genetics. They're the only artificially inseminated insect. This is great. If we ever get back to, we have, social groups and we can drop little things in the conversation, I mean, there's got to be a way to bring this up. Besides, just get the shirt that says, beekeeper, warning, may start talking bees, and then they're going to know. They might even bring up a subject and let you get your foot in the door. Longest lived insect without dormant periods. Okay, there's the cicadas and stuff, but these are like the queen. You got to remember, she doesn't get a dormant period. When we say she lives years, we don't mean she went into hibernation or something for a while, or a sort of dormancy. No, actually living all that time. Even the individual honeybee, the winter bees especially, can go 5-6 months, they figure. The economic value is incredible. They are the only insect we manage as livestock. We actually try to breed them, house them, feed them. We can't fence them. Darn it. But, and make them be organic and stay on their organic crops, for example. They're the only insect that produces a food. Not just that they are the food, but they produce a food that they use and that man uses. They have their own branch of medicine, which I couldn't even go into today. Apitherapy. I mean, the whole venom research and what pollen does for you. And apitherapy, I guess, is not just the use of venom to treat inflammations, arthritis and such, and allergies. It's also pollen, natural supplements, honey on wounds. When you think about it, there's a lot of medicinal properties, propolis too. They're being studied as biosensors and used as biosensors, really. They are the most researched insect. They're the most expensive. They go for the highest prices. Those auctions where they're auctioning off, rare objects. Last time I looked it up, there were some inseminated queens going for $590, but you had to buy 4 and pay the shipping. That's the kind of prices they go for. They are coming down. I am hearing of only a couple hundred queens that are, and I think Sue Colby on Whidbey Island might be doing them. You might be getting down to the $100. I don't know how many you have to buy to get that lower price. So I had lots of fun talking about all this, but I'd better stop. And did anyone come up with a better solution for Gretchen? Other than you try it, you check it, you monitor it. You got 3 hives. Of course, I never felt that way about like my kids, that I could try something out on one, experiment on one. Okay. Terrible joke. I could talk another hour, but I thought I'd give people a chance to ask questions or share or go to bed, because it is 8 o'clock and people work tomorrow. Not an old retired person like me. Okay. So Linda, are you unmuting yourself? Are you going to say something? She's like, maybe she would.
No, I was just going to say no. But I'm tired.
yeah, I know, and I feel bad about doing weekday. Did you see I put Apprentice on? Now that you finished it on the weekday nights, I put it on Saturday No, I did a weekday night again. I put beginner on Saturday mornings, double sessions
Oh,
in January. So, and then apprentice, I do that too. I put it on like a double session on Saturdays, and it takes like 3.5 Saturdays to get through the mornings, doing 8:30 to noon, half-hour break. If everybody really wants the half-hour break, we can make it less, but it is hard to sit and listen to somebody.
oh, but you know, it's a good topic too. So not all bad. It is
I
a
mean,
very interesting topic.